The moment the rusted pickup rolled onto the shoulder of the sunlit highway, everything Elias Morneau thought he had buried years ago came rushing back. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, the sky was painfully blue, and the police cruiser ahead flashed calmly in the daylight, but when Elias stepped out to help, his breath caught hard in his chest. The face beneath that uniform was a face he never forgot, a face tied to the worst and bravest day of his life, and suddenly the noise of passing cars faded as the past stood right in front of him. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and unseen connections that change lives, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Grandma's Book. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Elias was a single dad long before he ever planned to be one. At 38, his hands were permanently marked with grease and small burns from years under hoods and beneath broken engines. His small auto shop sat just outside a quiet town, the kind of place people pass through without noticing, much like Elias himself. Every morning after dropping his 10-year-old son Mateo at school, Elias worked until his shoulders ached, fixing cars for people who barely knew his name. Life had narrowed down to routines: pack lunches, pay bills late, hide the exhaustion, and never talk about the past. The daylight hours were easier, they kept the memories from creeping in. That morning, Elias was driving home early to surprise Mateo with lunch when he saw the police cruiser pulled over ahead, hood up, hazard lights blinking uselessly against the bright sky. Elias didn't hesitate. Helping stranded drivers was second nature to him. He slowed, parked, and grabbed his tool bag, expecting nothing more than a loose belt or dead battery, but as the officer stepped forward, removing sunglasses, time fractured. The man's face was older, harder, but unmistakable. Officer Daniel Kincaid, the last person Elias ever expected to see again. Years earlier, on another bright day, Daniel Kincaid had stood in a hospital hallway while Elias held his newborn son alone. That was the day Elias's wife never came home. A hit and run, a rushed siren, paperwork signed with shaking hands. Daniel had been the officer assigned to the case, the one who stayed late, who found the driver days later, who quietly told Elias that justice didn't always feel like justice. Elias never forgot the steadiness in that officer's eyes, or the way he treated grief like something fragile, not a file to be closed. Now, standing on the roadside, Elias felt frozen, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. His heart pounded with memories he'd locked away for the sake of survival. He had rebuilt engines easier than he had rebuilt himself. The officer, meanwhile, was squinting, clearly struggling to place him. Elias finally forced himself to move, kneeling by the cruiser, opening the hood, letting the familiar smell of metal ground him back in the present. Daylight glinted off tools as his hands worked automatically, even while his chest felt tight. The cruiser's problem was simple, but the moment wasn't. Elias could sense the officer watching him, recognition dawning slowly. When their eyes finally met fully, something shifted. The officer's posture softened, and Elias knew he had been recognized, not as just a mechanic, but as the man from a long-ago tragedy. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some moments didn't require words, only acknowledgement. Elias fixed the issue quickly, wiping his hands on an old cloth, ready to leave before emotions made him do something foolish. But as he stood, he noticed the exhaustion etched into the officer's face, the lines of someone who had carried other people's worst days for too long. Elias realized something then. Both of them had been shaped by that same day, just in different ways. One had gone home to an empty house and a crying newborn. The other had gone back to work, carrying a case that never fully left him. The officer reached into his cruiser and pulled out a folded paper. It was a citation book, but instead of a ticket, he handed Elias a small card. On it was the name of a local community fund, one Elias had quietly benefited from years ago without ever knowing who had nominated him. Child care help, emergency groceries, anonymous support that arrived when pride would have kept Elias from asking. The realization hit him harder than any memory. The help he once thought came from nowhere had come from a man who never forgot him either. Elias drove away afterward with blurred vision, pulling over once more just to breathe. He thought about how close he'd come to never stopping, about how easily lives crossed and separated without closure. That afternoon, he picked up Matteo early and took him for burgers in the sun. Watching his son laugh, Elias felt something loosen inside him. For years, he had believed he survived alone. That belief had hardened him. Now he understood that unseen hands had held him up when he was weakest. Days passed, but the encounter stayed with him. Elias began changing small things. He volunteered to fix cars for struggling families on weekends. He smiled more. He talked about his wife for the first time with Matteo, not as a wound, but as a memory worth honoring. Healing, he learned, wasn't loud or dramatic. It arrived quietly, often disguised as a broken-down cruiser on a bright highway. Weeks later, a letter arrived at his shop. No return address. Inside was a simple note of thanks, not for the repair, but for stopping, for reminding someone else why kindness mattered. Elias folded the letter carefully and placed it in his wallet, beside an old photo of Matteo as a baby. He no longer felt like a man only surviving daylight hours. He felt connected again, part of something larger than loss. Just before this story ends, please leave a comment sharing where you're watching from and what moment touched you most. It means more than you know. As Elias locked up his shop one warm afternoon, sunlight pouring across the road, he realized that some faces were unforgettable not because of pain, but because they represented moments where humanity chose compassion over indifference. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that small acts can echo for years, please like, share, and engage with this video. Your support helps keep stories of hope alive, and somewhere out there, someone may need this reminder today.